Sometimes I feel like I built my life on the shattered pieces of other people's dreams. I'm a lawyer, 39 years old, Manhattan. My mornings begin with coffee, no sugar, and emails from clients accused of things they did, or things they swear they never did. I've grown used to lies. They hang in the air of my office, hide in people's eyes, murmur through courtroom whispers. I hear them more often than I hear silence. For the past 10 years, I haven't allowed myself to be weak. High heels, a perfectly pressed suit, a face without a single readable emotion, that's been my armor. At first, I thought I was hiding my exhaustion. Then I realized I'd been hiding myself. Tinder, an app that I once downloaded out of curiosity, then out of boredom, and now out of the quiet admission that I no longer know how to meet people any other way. My swipes have become a kind of study. How people carry themselves, who's trying to impress, who's lying, who looks like a real person. I never looked for anything real, because I didn't believe it existed. When I saw his profile, I thought it was a joke. A pastor from Louisiana, 42 years old. In the photo, a man in a dark shirt, standing in front of an old church at sunset. He was looking straight at the camera, and in his gaze there was something I hadn't seen in a very long time, calm. Not pride, not challenge, not a mask. Just quiet. I don't know what made me swipe right. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe madness. Or maybe the urge to step out of the glass elevator of my life. The one that carries me from a luxury apartment to an office and back again, day after day after day. He messaged me 3 hours later. It was a simple message, no clever tricks. He wasn't flirting, bragging, or playing games. He told me about his dog, 12 years old, and how she likes to fall asleep at his feet during Sunday sermons. I read it and felt like the message had come from another century. No filler words, no sarcasm, no pain tucked between the lines. I didn't reply right away. For a few days, I just kept rereading it. And then, I did respond. Simply because I was curious how long he could keep being real. I kept looking for the catch. It's a habit, testing people's strength before they get too close. But he didn't come closer. He simply stayed where he was, like a quiet flame, not blazing, but never fading. His messages arrived almost every evening, never pushy, never expectant. He'd share his day, sometimes ask about mine. He didn't dig, didn't pressure, didn't try to save me. I caught myself waiting for his letters. They sounded like the whisper of an old tree in the wind. Steady, calm, carrying a warmth that doesn't hit you all at once, but slowly seeps into your bones. There was no sharp sarcasm in his words, the kind I usually use to deflect men. He didn't try to make me laugh or impress me, he just was. And I allowed myself to simply be near him, if only in messages. He wrote about people, with love and with sorrow. About a woman in his congregation who lost her husband, but still baked pies for everyone on Sundays. About a little boy who asked too many questions about God, and got too few answers from the grown-ups. About an old man who came to church not for faith, but for company. I read it all, and I was surprised. It felt like people trusted him with their shadows, and he never tried to chase those shadows away. He just stayed close. I began to remember things I had buried deep. My grandmother, who used to take me to church in Ohio. Her hands smelled like cinnamon and warm milk, and her voice always sounded like a song, even when she was just asking me to pass the salt. I remembered feeling safe beside her, not because she promised everything would be okay, but because she believed that even if it wasn't, it would pass. I hadn't thought about that in 10 years, not until him. One night, after getting home late from a tough trial, I found a message from him. He wrote about walking through a field outside town. Dandelions, tall grass, the click of crickets. He said sometimes he stays silent, not because there are no words, but because in silence, you can hear what really matters. I read it 3 times. Then I turned off my phone, and just sat there. No work emails, no wine, no Netflix. Just sat. As if I, too, needed to be in silence for a while. A few weeks later, I had a business trip to Atlanta. And suddenly, I caught myself looking at the map, trying to figure out how far it was from there to Louisiana. Ridiculous. Me, the woman who plans every step, every gesture, every emotion, suddenly thinking, what if? I wrote to him about it. Casually, no expectations. Just mentioned it in passing. He replied briefly. If you decide to stop by, I'll be home. No pressure. No parentheses. No exclamation points. No persuasion. And that made me wonder. Maybe I do want to see what someone looks like when they know how to be silent. Beautifully. I didn't tell anyone. Not a friend, not a colleague, not even myself out loud. It was a decision I made on the plane, staring out the window, where the sky and clouds blurred into one. I simply opened the map and set a route. 5 hours by car. A road stretching through forests, farms, and small towns with names that sounded like they were made up 100 years ago and never changed. I stopped in front of a small, tidy church built from pale wood. The roof sloped gently, the paint was peeling. The windows were simple, no stained glass Bible scenes, just plain panes letting in the warm southern light. An old dog lay on the porch. She lifted her eyes as if she knew who I was. She didn't bark. Just gave a slight nod and rested her head back on her paws. He stepped out of the door as if he had known I would arrive at that exact moment. No surprise, no rush. He just stood there, wearing the same dark shirt from his photo and a pair of faded jeans. He looked at me not like someone seeing a stranger with a suitcase and tired eyes, but like someone seeing the version of me I had long since hidden away. We didn't hug, didn't say hello, didn't try to fill the silence with words. He took a step to the side and motioned for me to come in. It was all so simple. No rituals, no ceremony. Just the sound of our footsteps on wooden floors, the scent of aged timber, and a silence I didn't want to escape. Inside the church, it was cool. Benches lined up in quiet rows. The altar was decorated with wildflowers, real ones, fresh, with drops of water still on the petals. He led me to a small table in the corner with 2 chairs, a plain teapot, 2 porcelain cups. He poured me some, without asking, just knowing it was exactly what I needed. Not coffee, not wine, not conversation. Warmth. We sat, in silence. I watched his hands, strong, scarred, callous not by books, but by life. He wasn't restless. He didn't try to impress. He didn't try to fill the space. He just was. And in that simple being, there was more honesty than in all my past relationships combined. Suddenly, I realized everything he'd written was true. Not in the factual sense, but in spirit. His world wasn't about the external. It was about what's within. He didn't try to change me. He didn't need to understand why I was alone. He simply accepted. Not agreeing. Not arguing. Not analyzing. Just accepting, as I was. I felt something inside me begin to loosen, something that had been clenched for a very long time. As if I'd finally stopped holding my back straight, not my body but my soul. I couldn't remember the last time I had allowed myself to simply be, not prove, not fight, not run. When I stood up, he rose with me. We still didn't hug. He walked me to the door, and his hand brushed mine, maybe by accident, maybe not. And in that brief touch, there was more than in any passionate night. It said, I know you'll leave, and that's okay, but I'm still glad you came. I came back to Manhattan late in the evening. The gray streets felt colder than usual. The cars weren't louder, just sharper. People weren't walking faster, just more frantically. I got out of the cab in front of my building, and for the first time in a long while, I thought, I'm here, but not quite here. The apartment greeted me with its usual silence. Everything was in its place. The glass table, the chair by the window, the laptop on the kitchen counter. Even the cup I'd left before the trip was still standing, like nothing had changed. But I knew I had changed. Quietly. Unnoticeably. Not on the surface, but somewhere under the skin, between the ribs, closer to the heart. I tried to fall back into routine. Wake up at 6:30. Coffee. News. Meetings. Court. Paperwork. planners, colleagues with tight smiles, clients who always lie. Everything just as it was, but I kept catching myself listening to the voices around me and realizing none of them sounded like his. I tried to forget. Tried to convince myself it had been a coincidence, a fleeting episode, a tourist detour into someone else's reality. I kept telling myself it wasn't about me, not my life, that I'd just been tired and needed a sweet illusion. But memory is a strange thing. It doesn't ask permission to stay. He didn't write. And neither did I. We hadn't made any plans, no promises. We simply let it go. Or pretended to. I scrolled through Tinder again, out of habit, not desire. No one looked alive. Same teeth, same lines, same, looking for something real. But I already had something real. And now everything else was just noise. At some point, I realized I'd started listening to silence. Not music, not podcasts, silence. Like the silence in that church, or in the field he wrote about. I caught myself turning off the lights earlier, not wearing suits every day anymore. Taking a day off, simply because I needed time for nothing. Those changes scared me. They came without warning. I wasn't controlling them, and that annoyed me. Every part of me wanted to reclaim control. I even scheduled a date, dinner with a marketing executive from Brooklyn. He was handsome, smart, well-read. We talked about books, law, the global market. I nodded, smiled. But inside, I felt empty. As if I was having a conversation on behalf of someone else. After dinner, he offered to come up. I politely declined. And when the elevator doors closed, I stood outside my own door, keys in hand, with a strange feeling in my chest. Not sadness, not pain, but something like gratitude. Gratitude for the fact that I'd had a meeting, one that reminded me, I'm still alive. Almost 3 weeks had passed since I returned. I had stopped waiting. Or maybe I had just learned not to show myself that I was waiting. The days went by, like pages in a contract you skim through diagonally, knowing you'll sign it anyway. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm. Even loneliness became comfortable again, like an old pair of shoes, not joyful but not painful either. I stayed late at work more often than necessary, fell asleep with my phone in hand, swiped through Tinder stories faster than I could read them. Everything was under control, just like before. And then, one morning, as I was checking my emails, scrolling past ads and automated alerts, I saw his name. A simple message, no subject line, no attachments. It started as if not a single day had passed. He wrote that he had recently seen a flower pushing its way up through the asphalt. Just one, growing between the cracks. Small, stubborn. No one noticed it but him. He stopped, just to look at it. Didn't pick it, didn't take a photo, just looked, and kept walking. He wrote that everything was the same. The same church. The same people. The same morning walks. Only now he sometimes thought about how much one can feel, even without saying a word. He didn't ask how I was. Didn't suggest meeting. Didn't complain. Didn't try to resume anything. The message was like his gaze that day. Acceptance. Stillness. Peace. I read it 3 times. Then again. Not because I was searching for some hidden meaning, but because every word resonated inside me. Not in my head, in my body. It wasn't a letter to me. It was a letter within me. I closed the laptop and sat by the window for a long while. Outside, a soft rain was falling. People were rushing, ducking under umbrellas. And I just watched the droplets slide down the glass. And at some point, I realized I no longer wanted to live the way I did before. Not because he had reappeared, but because through him, I remembered. I can still feel. Not control, not analyze, not anticipate. Just feel. I didn't plan the trip. I didn't book anything in advance, didn't request time off. I simply woke up on a Friday, turned off my alarm, and didn't go to the office. I threw on a pair of jeans, tied my hair back, grabbed a small bag, and went downstairs. The cab driver asked, "Where to?" I said, "The airport." For the first time in my life, with no ticket, no destination. It was easy. as if someone else was moving through me. A woman I had hidden for years. The one who wasn't afraid to be illogical, vulnerable, alive. I landed in New Orleans, rented a car, and drove deep into the countryside again. Same road, same fields. Only this time, I wasn't questioning whether it was the right thing to do. I wasn't looking for permission. Wasn't building a script. I just drove. By the time I reached the church, the sun was low on the horizon. The air was thick and humid, that unmistakable southern scent of earth, trees, old wood. The dog was on the porch again. She looked up at me, as if she recognized me, but didn't move. I stepped inside. It was empty. Only sunlight sliding across the pews, and in the corner, the same table with the cups. He wasn't there, but I wasn't afraid. There was no fear, no expectations, no resentment. Only silence. The same silence I once tried to forget. I sat down on a bench by the wall. Closed my eyes. Breathed. Didn't think. Just felt. As if every plank in the floor, every crack in the window, every quiet icon knew me better than I knew myself. He came in a few minutes later. Slowly. Without surprise. As if he had known I'd come back. His face looked a little tired, sun-warmed, with faint lines around his eyes. He paused by the doorway, not approaching. I didn't stand, didn't move closer. I just looked at him. He nodded. Sat on the same bench, a few feet away. We sat in silence. I could feel his presence the way you feel sunlight on your skin. Unconsciously, but deeply. Then he turned to me. His gaze was soft. Warm. But there was something else in it too. Something heavy, like a stone beneath water. Invisible, but altering the current. He didn't speak. But I knew. He wanted to say something. Not about us. About himself. Something important. Something that could change everything. And suddenly I realized. I was ready to hear it. Whatever it was. Not as a lawyer. Not as a woman. But as a human being who had finally learned not to run from what's real. He spoke quietly. Almost in a whisper. But every word sank into me like a nail into dry wood. No theatrics, no drama, just facts. A simple life, with its own shadows, that he lost his wife 3 years ago to cancer. An aggressive form. It all happened quickly. First the diagnosis, then the fight, then the end. He stayed with her until the last moment. Held her hand when she could no longer speak. Never left her bedside. Not for a minute. Not for a second. After the funeral, he didn't preach for 2 months. He just lived in the house where everything reminded him of her. Cups, blankets, her scent. People brought food, prayed, embraced him. And he stared at the wall. No faith protects you from pain. It only helps you not to hate it. He wasn't looking for anyone. Wasn't waiting. Didn't want to. But then he started writing. Not love letters. Just thoughts. For himself. Sometimes on Twitter. Sometimes on napkins. Sometimes just in his head. Then someone told him to try Tinder. To step out of the silence, they said. He didn't believe it would matter. But he uploaded a photo. And waited. I was the first person he messaged. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for honesty. Not to begin something, to bring something to an end. He didn't speak with sadness. There was no tragedy in his voice, only acceptance. And in that acceptance, a strength I had never seen in another human being. He wasn't asking for pity. Wasn't seeking rescue. He was simply sharing. Because he sensed I was ready to listen. I listened, barely breathing. And somewhere inside me, the walls I had spent a lifetime building began to crack. Because he wasn't asking me to love him. Wasn't asking me to stay. Wasn't asking me to forget my past. He simply was, fully, with his pain. With his story. Without makeup. Without filters. And I realized. He was the first person I'd ever met next to whom I didn't feel the need to be strong. Didn't feel the need to be easy. Or beautiful. Or correct. Next to him, I could simply be me. We stepped out of the church as dusk was falling. The air was warm, scented with lilac and dust. I walked beside him, not touching his hand. But I could feel him there. And it didn't matter whether he'd still be there tomorrow. It didn't matter that there were no promises between us. What mattered was that this encounter had become something no other had ever been. I didn't know if I would stay. I didn't know if I could fit him into my life, or myself into his. But I knew one thing: I no longer wanted to live as if I didn't know how to feel. I stayed in Louisiana for 2 more days, not in his house, not in his life. Just nearby. In the mornings we drank tea on the porch. I listened as he spoke with neighbors, watched as he trimmed the bushes outside the church. He didn't do it because he had to. He did it because he believed. It was the right thing to do. I wrote, I was silent. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to make a decision. I didn't think about the future. I didn't search for meaning. I simply was. And that turned out to be the hardest and the simplest thing of all. When the day came to leave, I packed my bag in silence. He didn't stop me, didn't ask a single question. But in his eyes, there was gratitude. Not for the visit, but for the fact that I had allowed myself to be myself, even if only for a moment. He walked me to the car. The dog wasn't there, as if she understood this moment belonged only to the 2 of us. I opened the door, started the engine, looked at him through the glass. He stood there calmly, smiling, just a little. Not like someone saying goodbye, but like someone who knows the most important thing has already happened. I drove away without looking back, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew this wasn't an ending, and it wasn't a beginning. It was a story. Mine, his, ours, short, real. Back in New York, I went back to work, put on the suit again, signed the documents again. But I was no longer the same. Inside me, there lived a silence. His silence. And it gave me strength. Sometimes we wrote to each other. Briefly. Nothing extra. He told me about a new sermon. I told him about a client who cried in court for the first time. We didn't need more, because the important things had already been said. Without words. He stayed there. I stayed here. And that felt right. Some people come into your life not to stay forever, but to remind you that you still know how to live for real.